My husband laughed when I asked for grocery money. Get a job like a real adult. 2 months later, his mother called me crying, asking why the mortgage company had her number. I said, ask your son whose name is on the loan. I had the list on the back of an envelope and I had added it up twice, and both times it came to $58 and change. That is what I was asking for, not a sum. A list. Milk, coffee, a bag of the chicken thighs that go on offer on Thursdays, bread, the cat's food, and a box of the tea my mother liked, which I was still buying in March even though my mother had been dead since the end of January, and I did not have a single explanation for why, except that Thursday is when I buy tea. Kurt was at the counter with his phone in one hand and a bowl of cereal in the other, and he did the laugh. Not a cruel laugh. I want to be careful here because I have told this story to 2 people and both of them immediately made him into somebody he is not. It was a short, surprised, up-in-the-throat laugh, the kind you do when somebody says something you cannot believe they said. Then he said it. Get a job like a real adult. And he went out to the truck. I stood in that kitchen with an envelope in my hand, and the fridge making the noise it makes, and I did not cry, and I did not throw anything, and I did what I have done for 2 years, which is I opened the app and moved $40 out of the account my mother's hospice paperwork had been paid from, and I went to the store and I did not buy the tea. The thing about that morning is that I got the whole shape of it wrong, every part. I thought I was being humiliated by a man who did not respect me. I was being managed by a man who was drowning. The house on Ledgemont is mine, not ours. Mine. Sole title, sole mortgage, my name on both since April 2020. Nobody knows that. Not his mother, not his brother Wade, not his sister Dee, not anybody who has eaten Thanksgiving dinner in it for 6 years, not the neighbors, not my own cousin. Here is how it happened, and it is very boring, which is the point. In 2019, Kurt's company went under. Hollenbeck Site Services, 3 trucks, a skid steer, 4 guys, excavation, and site prep for residential builders. He ran it for 6 years, and it did fine. And then a builder in Kettersville went bad on him for $111,000 and did not come back from it, and neither did Kurt. The LLC dissolved in November 2019. There was a judgment. There was a settlement. His credit score in early 2020 was 512. And in March 2020, we found the house. The one we had been driving past for a year. The brick one with the bad kitchen and the good garage. And there was exactly one way to buy it. The loan officer said it plainly. In a way I remember because she said it to both of us and looked only at me. With him on the application, there is no approval. Without him, at your income, at your score, there is. I was a claims adjuster then, 14 years. I made $68,000 a year, and I had a credit score of 806 because I have never in my life been late for anything. So I bought a house. And Kurt sat in the passenger seat of my car afterwards in the lot behind the title company, and he was quiet for about 4 minutes, and then he said, "Don't tell my mother." I said, "It's not a secret, Kurt." He said, "I'm not asking for it to be a secret. I'm asking you not to tell my mother." And I said, "Okay." And that okay is where all of it comes from. Bernadette Hollenbeck is 74 and thinks the sun comes up because her sons ask it to. She is not a monster. She is a woman who was widowed at 41 with 3 kids and a mortgage, and who got them through it by deciding, very early and very firmly, that her boys were capable, and who has never revised that decision in the face of any evidence whatsoever. Kurt is the middle one, and the one it landed hardest on. Wade is a lineman, and Dee teaches. Kurt was the one who was going to build something. When the company folded in 2019, she was told it was a bad client. That is all. 6 years later, that is still all. And I know because at Easter 2023, she told my sister-in-law that Kurt had walked away from that business because the margins weren't there, which is a sentence he must have given her, and which she has been carrying around like a receipt. If Bernadette Hollenbeck found out that her son's wife owned the house he lived in, it would not be a fact to her. It would be an obituary. I watched 2019 happen, and I did not understand any of it at the time. What I saw was a man who got very tidy. That is the only way I can put it. Kurt has never been a tidy person. His truck has always been an environment, and in the summer of 2019, he started coming home and cleaning things. The garage, the gutters. He regrouted the shower in our rented house on Delacour, which was not our shower, in a house we were leaving in 8 months. He stopped eating properly and got thinner, and I told him he looked good, and he said thanks. In September of that year, I came home early on a Wednesday because a claim inspection got canceled, and he was sitting in the truck in the driveway, not doing anything, not on the phone, just sitting in the driver's seat in the driveway of the house he lived in at 2:30 in the afternoon with his hands on his knees. I knocked on the window and he jumped, and then he laughed, and he came in and had a shower, and we ordered from the Thai place. I asked him once in October whether the business was okay. Once. And he said the builder in Kettersville had stiffed him, but it was being handled. And I said okay. And I went back to work the next morning and did not ask again for 6 years. That is my part. I am not writing this to be the wronged party. I am a professional investigator of losses. I have spent 14 years listening to people explain what happened to their property, and the entire skill is knowing when somebody has answered a smaller question than the one you ask. He answered a smaller question in October 2019 in a kitchen in a rented house, and I let it go because pushing would have made it real. I have thought a great deal about why. The honest answer is that I did not want to be married to a man whose business had failed. Not because I would have loved him less, because it would have meant conversations, and his mother, and Wade's face at Christmas, and a version of our life I would have had to explain to people. So there were 2 of us doing it. He did it with a file tote in the garage garage, and I did it by not asking. We were extremely well matched. I understood that in 2020. I understand it now. I am not saying I was wrong to agree. I am saying that I agreed to one thing in a parking lot and it turned into an entirely different thing over 6 years, and there is no moment I can point at where it changed. I stopped working in January of last year. My mother had a diagnosis in October and a hospice bed in the front room of her own house in December, and I took unpaid leave in the second week of January, and she died on the 30th. The leave was supposed to be 6 weeks. It has been 14 months. I am not going to explain that. I have tried to explain it to a lot of people, and it does not come out right. I did not become depressed in a way anybody could see. I got up, I cooked, I painted the hall. I dealt with an estate that took 9 months because my mother, who was the most organized woman I have ever met, had 3 separate accounts nobody knew about, and a safety deposit box with a key nobody could find. And every time I thought about going back into an office and telling a man on the phone that his water damage was excluded, something in me sat down and would not get up. I will tell you the actual reason because I worked it out eventually, in the garage, on the bucket, about 90 minutes into the file. My mother was a bookkeeper for a chain of tire franchises for 31 years, and she was the most financially careful person I have ever known. She had 3 accounts. She had a spreadsheet from 1998 that she migrated 4 times. When she died, there was not one unpaid bill in that house, and there was a folder on the kitchen table labeled "For Iris," with the deed to her house, her policy numbers, and a note about where the boiler service records were. And she had a 4th account that none of us knew about, at a credit union in a town she had not lived in since 1987, with $61,000 in it. She had been putting money into it since my father left in 1991. $20 a week, then $50, then $100, for 33 years. There was no note about that one. There was nothing. Just an account with my name as beneficiary and a passbook and a safety deposit box we could not find the key to for 4 months. I know exactly what it was for, and so do you, and I have never once said it out loud to a member of my family. My mother spent 33 years quietly building a fund that existed for the sole purpose of making sure her daughter would never have to stay somewhere. And I could not go back to work because I could not face being the sort of person who reads other people's disasters for a living while sitting on top of that. So there is the arithmetic of this entire year laid out. My husband hid a debt in a garage because he could not bear to be helped, and I sat in a house for 14 months not working because I could not bear to look at what I had been given, and neither of us said a single word about any of it. And then we had a fight about $58 of groceries, so I did not have income. From January of last year, I had no money coming in of my own at all for the first time since I was 19. That is when the thing about grocery money started. We had never had that arrangement. For 6 years, there had been 2 incomes going into one account, and nobody had ever had to ask anybody for anything. And then there was one income, and it was his, and it went into his account because it always had, and mine had nothing in it, and there was suddenly a transaction where there had never been a transaction. The first time I asked, in February, he transferred it in about 9 seconds and said nothing. By April, he was asking what it was for. By July, there was a tone. And by March of this year, 14 months in, standing in the kitchen with an envelope in my hand, there was the laugh. I want to lay the 14 months out properly, because "he wouldn't give me grocery money" is the kind of sentence that makes people picture something it was not. He never refused, not once, in 14 months. Every single time I asked, the money came. That is what made it unbearable. There was nothing to point at. I could not tell anybody, "My husband won't give me money," because he always did within the hour, without exception. What changed was the shape of the asking. In February, it was a transfer with no message. In April, it was for what? Not aggressive, just a question, the way you'd ask anybody. In May, he started saying the amount back to me. 60? For what? 60? In June, he asked me whether I'd looked at the online postings for the county, because Dee had said they were hiring adjusters at the county. In August, at his sister's, in front of Dee and her husband, he said, "Iris is on sabbatical," and did the little air quotes. And everybody laughed, including me. In October, he set up a standing transfer of $200 on the 1st, which sounds generous, and which was the worst thing that happened in the whole 14 months, because $200 is a decision somebody else has made about what your life costs. Before that, I had been asking. After that, I had an allowance. I did not fight about any of it. That is the part I have had to sit with. I was a claims adjuster for 14 years. My entire professional competence is reading a set of facts and saying calmly to a hostile person on a telephone, "This is what the document says." I have told 200 people a year that they were wrong about their own houses. And in my own kitchen, I could not say the sentence, "I bought this house," because of a parking lot in 2020, because of one, okay, here is the specific mechanism, and I did not see it while it was happening. The longer a lie is maintained, the more the maintenance looks like the truth. By year 4, "Don't tell my mother" was not a favor I was doing him anymore. It was simply the state of the world. Everybody in that family, including me, moved through a house in which a man supported his wife, and I had helped build it brick by brick, out of nothing but silence at Thanksgivings. So when he told me to get a job like a real adult, he was not lying to me. He was describing the world we had made accurately, out loud, for the first time. Here is what I thought was happening, and I want to put it down honestly because I was so completely wrong. I thought, he has decided I am not pulling my weight. I thought, he is a man who lost a business and is watching his wife not work, and it has turned into something ugly in him. And every dollar he hands me is a dollar that reminds reminds him of the year he could not hand anybody anything. That is a completely coherent explanation. 2 friends agreed with it. My cousin agreed with it so hard she offered me her spare room. It is also, in the specific way that matters, backwards, because a man who feels superior does not check the mail before you do. He had started doing that in the autumn. I noticed it and filed it as nothing. He would come in from the truck and get the mail on the way, every day, which he had never done in 6 years. I did the mail. I have always done the mail. I am the one who knows where the shredder is. He got there first for about 5 months, and I put it down to the mail arriving earlier. Bernadette called on a Tuesday in May at 4:20 in the afternoon. I knew from the first syllable. She has a phone voice that is aggressively pleasant, and this was not it. She said, Iris, honey, there's been a phone call. I said, okay, and she said, a mortgage company. A mortgage company rang my house. She was crying. 74 years old, in her own kitchen, crying to her daughter-in-law about a phone call, and the thing she kept saying over and over was, why would they have my number? Iris, why would a mortgage company have my number? I said, Bernadette, I need you to slow down. Who called you? She said a name I did not recognize. A servicer. Not ours. We are with Cornerstone Federal and have been since 2020, and I write the check. She said they had asked for her by name. She said they had asked her to confirm she knew a Curtis Hollenbeck. She said she had said, yes, of course, that's my son. And the woman on the phone had thanked her and said something about a reference on a recent application. And Bernadette had said, what application? And the woman had said she was not able to discuss it. Then Bernadette said the sentence that took the floor out. She said, is the house all right? And I stood in the hall of the house that has my name on it, alone. And I said the only thing I could think of, which was, ask your son whose name is on the loan. I have gone back and forth on that sentence for a long time. People who hear this story think it is the good part. It is not. It is the part where a woman who had been managing something carefully for 6 years got tired for 4 seconds and dropped it on a 74-year-old who had done nothing. She said, what? I said, I have to go, Bernadette. She rang back twice that evening and I did not pick up. She rang Kurt. I know she rang Kurt because his phone went at 7:10 while he was in the shower, and I looked at it on the bed and did not touch it, and it went again at 7:14, and when he came out he read the screen and put the phone face down on the dresser and said nothing at all. That is when I knew for certain that whatever this was, he already knew about it. We ate dinner. I made the chicken thighs. We watched 40 minutes of something about people buying houses in Portugal, which is a program we have watched perhaps 200 times, and neither of us said one word about the fact that his mother had called both of us crying on the same afternoon. I have thought about that evening more than almost any part of this. 2 adults in a front room with the television on, each knowing the other knew, and neither able to move first. Him because moving first meant saying the word judgment, and me because moving first meant saying the word deed. 6 years of not saying 2 words, and they finally arrived on the same day, and we watched a couple from Kent look at a farmhouse. At about 11, he said from the doorway, was my mother all right? And I said, no. And he said, right, and went to bed. 11 minutes. That is how long it took me to find it, and I have thought a lot about the fact that it took 11 minutes, because it means it was findable at any point in the previous 5 months, and I simply had not looked. The county property records are online. Anybody can pull them. I typed in my own address, and there it was, exactly as it has been since April 2020. 1 grantee, 1 name, mine. Nothing had been done to the title. Nothing had been added, nothing encumbered, no second lien, nothing recorded. Whatever had happened, it had not touched the house. Then I did the other thing, which was to sit at the kitchen table at 4:30 in the afternoon and open the drawer in the hall table where the mail goes. The mail had been going somewhere else. I did not confront him. I want to explain why, because it is not restraint and it is not strategy. I did not confront him because I did not know what I had. I had a phone call to his mother, a mail drawer with nothing in it, and a property record that said nothing was wrong. If I had walked up to Kurt Hollenbeck on the Tuesday night and said, what have you done? He would have said nothing, and he would have been technically correct, and I would have had no second question. So I waited 4 days, and I watched him. And this is the part where the whole story turned over, and it turned over on something very small. He came in on the Thursday, and he did not get the mail. He walked straight past the box. He came in, put his keys down, and went and sat on the edge of the bed with his boots still on for about 6 minutes. A man who has got away with something checks the mail. A man who is waiting for a phone call does not, because the phone call has already come. I sat in the front room with a cold cup of coffee, and I understood all at once that I had spent 14 months living with somebody who was frightened, and that I had read every single symptom of it as contempt, because contempt was the explanation that fit the sentence he said in the kitchen. It took me 6 more days to find the actual thing, and I found it in a box in the garage, not hidden. That is what got me. It was in a plastic file tote on a shelf with 2 other totes, labeled in his handwriting in marker. HSS 2016-2019, Hollenbeck Site Services. I had been in that garage 400 times. I had moved that tote to get to the Christmas boxes in November. I sat on an upturned bucket in my own garage in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and read the file for 2 hours and 40 minutes. It is worse in order. That is the thing about paper. The story is not in any single page. It is in the sequence, and the sequence was all there because Kurt Hollenbeck has never thrown away a document in his life. 2016, the trade account application with Pallant. A good year. He is 34 in the signature. March 2017, the personal guarantee. 4 pages. pages. Somebody had ticked the boxes for him and he signed at the bottom of page 4 in blue ink, and I sat there and thought about the fact that I was, in 2017, in a house we rented on Delacour, and that we had gone to Nashville that April, and that at no point in that year did I know this piece of paper existed. 2018, invoices, ordinary, boring, somebody complaining about a delivery of drainage pipe. March 2019, the first letter from the builder in Kettersville, very polite, cash flow, 90 days. August 2019, a demand letter from Pallant. October 2019, a handwritten page. His writing on lined paper, a list of numbers with things crossed out and redone, and at the bottom, circled twice, a figure I could not make sense of until I realized it was what he had left. $2,100. My husband had $2,100 in October 2019, and I did not know that either. In October 2019, I bought a coat. November 2019, dissolution. 2021, nothing. 2022, nothing. Then September of last year, the collections firm in Akron, 1 page, 3 paragraphs, informing Curtis A. Hollenbeck that they had located a current residential address, our address, typed out with the zip, on a letter that had come to my house and been taken out of my mailbox before I got to it. The judgment with interest was listed at $79,400 and something. I could not read the rest because my hands were shaking hard enough that I put the page down on the concrete instead of holding it. That is the moment the 14 months rearranged. Not later, not at the kitchen table, on a bucket, in a garage, with a page on the floor. Because I had spent 14 months believing I was married to a man who thought I was worthless. And the actual situation was that I was married to a man who had received a letter in September saying that a creditor knew where he slept, and who had then gone into the kitchen every morning for 6 months and made a joke about my sabbatical. The company dissolved in 2019. There was a judgment from a supplier, Pallant Supply, for $61,000, and there was a personal guarantee, 4 pages, signed by Curtis A. Hollenbeck on the 14th of March 2017, in blue ink, guaranteeing the company's trade account in his individual capacity. That guarantee did not dissolve with the LLC. That is the whole point of a personal guarantee. It is the thing that exists precisely so that dissolving the company does not make it go away. It had been accruing since 2019. And in the same tote, in a manila envelope, was a letter dated the previous September addressed to Curtis Hollenbeck at our address on Ledgemont from a collections firm in Akron, referencing the Pallant judgment and advising that they had located a current residential address and would be pursuing enforcement. September. He had been carrying it since September. He had told me to get a job in March. I called a lawyer before I called my husband, which I am not proud of and would do again. Her name is Marguerite Okwosa, and she has been doing consumer and creditor defense for 19 years, and she charged me $280 for 40 minutes, and it was the best money I have spent in my life. She explained 3 things, in order, very calmly, while I took notes on the back of an envelope, which I only noticed afterwards. 1. The judgment is his, individually, not mine, not marital, in this state, on these facts, on a premarital business debt with a personal guarantee. My house is not exposed. My income, when I have one, could be, his wages could be, but the house is not. 2. The reason a mortgage company called his mother is that he had applied for something and listed her as a personal reference, and the application had gone far enough for verification and then died. 3. She said, and I wrote it down word for word, Mrs. Hollenbeck. People in his position usually aren't hiding a purchase. They're hiding a payment. The application was a home equity line, $95,000 against a stated equity of $148,000. He had submitted it online on a Sunday night in April. He had listed Bernadette as a personal reference because the form asked for one, and there was nobody else he could put down who would not immediately ask me, and it was denied. Not because of his credit, though that did not help. It was denied at the point where the underwriter pulled the title and found out that the person applying for a line against the property was not on the deed. The adverse action notice is 2 sentences long. The applicant is not a title holder of record for the subject property. A line of credit secured by this property requires the participation of all title holders. He could not borrow against the house because it is my house. He could not tell me it was my house because his mother thinks it is his. And he could not settle a $61,000 judgment that had been quietly accruing for 6 years, that had found his home address in September, and that he had told absolutely nobody about, including, and I checked this later, his own accountant. That is what Get a Job Like a Real Adult was. It was not contempt. It was a man doing arithmetic out loud in the only direction he could bear to do it in. If she works, if there is a second income, I can qualify for something smaller in my own name, and none of them ever have to know. Every cruel thing he said to me for 14 months was a man trying to solve a problem without saying a word. I put it on the table on a Thursday. 3 things in a row, face up. The adverse action notice, the property record, the 2017 personal guarantee with his signature in blue ink. He came in at 6:10 and saw them from the doorway and did not take his coat off. He stood there for a long time, and I am not going to pretend I felt sorry for him in that moment, because I did not. I had been called a freeloader in my own kitchen over $58. The first thing he did was look for the tote. I watched him do it. His eyes went off me and towards the door to the garage, and I said, "It's still out there." I put it back. He said, "You went in the garage," which is, of all the sentences sentences available to a man in that situation, an extraordinary one to choose. Not, "You went through my things." Not, "How dare you." He said, "You went in the garage," in the tone of a man discovering that a door he had assumed was locked had never had a lock on it. I said, "Kurt, it's on a shelf. It's got a label on it. I've moved it to get to the Christmas boxes." And he sat down on the second stair with his coat still on. He said, "I've been waiting for this since September." I said, "For me to find it?" He said, "For anybody to find it." He said, "How long have you known?" I said, 11 days. "How long have you?" He said, "September." Then he said, "March. I've known since March that I couldn't fix it." I asked him one question. It was not the one I had planned. I had planned 6 versions of, "Why did you lie to me?" on the drive back from the lawyer's office, and I did not use any of them. I said, "Why did you think I wouldn't have signed?" And my husband stood in a doorway, in a work coat, and said the truest thing he has said to me in 9 years. He said, "I knew you'd have signed." That is what he could not do. Not ask. He could not survive being a man whose wife signs for him, could not survive one more document with her name on top and his underneath. And so he had spent 8 months looking for any road at all that did not end at my signature. And when he ran out of roads, he tried to push me back to work so I could be the income instead of the owner. He said, "If you sign it, then it's yours. And then that's what it is, for good." I said, "Kurt, it's already mine. It's been mine since 2020. And he said, "Yeah," and sat down on the floor of the hallway. He talked for about an hour after that, which is roughly 58 minutes longer than my husband has ever talked about anything. He told me the builder in Kettersville had a daughter the same age as Dee's oldest, and that they had gone to the same nursery, and that for about 3 months in 2019, Kurt genuinely believed the man was going to come good because of that, which is the stupidest possible reason to believe anything, and which he said out loud with his head against the wall. He told me that in November 2019, on the day the dissolution went through, he sat in the truck outside his mother's house for 40 minutes and then drove home without going in, and that he has never told her one true thing about the business since. He told me the thing that actually broke it open, which was that in September, when the letter came, his first thought, his literal first thought, standing at the mailbox, was that if he could get a line against the house, he could clear it, and nobody would ever have to know, and he could put the whole of 2019 in the ground. And then he found out, in April, from an underwriter, in a 2-sentence letter, that he could not borrow against the house because it was not his house. He said, "I knew that. Obviously I knew that. I was in the room." He said, "But I'd stopped knowing it. That is the sentence I keep. 6 years of everybody, including him, living inside a story, until a man forgot the actual legal position of the building he sleeps in, not because anybody lied to him, but because the truth had been so carefully not mentioned that it had gone soft. At some point around 11, he said, 'Are you leaving?' And I said I didn't know, which was true, and which is not the answer either of us wanted. He said, 'Okay.' Then he said, 'For what it's worth, the job thing.' He had his hands over his face. 'I knew what I was doing. I want you to know I knew. I wasn't confused about it. I said that to you knowing exactly what it was." And I said, "I know, because that is the part I will not let him off." And he did not ask me to. There is a version of this where the reveal makes the cruelty retroactively fine, and that version is a lie. He was drowning, and he was also, every morning for 6 months, choosing the sentence that would hurt me most efficiently, because a person who feels small will reach for the nearest thing to stand on. Understanding why somebody did it is not the same as it not having happened. The negotiation took 5 weeks, and I did all of it, which surprised nobody more than me. Marguerite Okwuosa told me the number to open at, and I opened at it. 22,000. They came back at 65. We landed at 38 after a phone call in which a man in Akron told me that a judgment is a judgment, and I told him, in the voice I have used on 200 people a year for 14 years, that a judgment is a piece of paper, and that what he actually had was a debtor with no assets in his own name and a wife with no obligation whatsoever, and that I was offering him money that did not have to exist. He said he'd call me back. He called me back in 9 minutes. I put the phone down and sat in the front room of the house, and I felt something I had not felt since January of last year, which was competent. Kurt was in the kitchen. He had been standing in the doorway for the last 4 minutes of it. He said, "That's your job. That's what you actually do." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I forgot." And I said, "So did I." We settled the Pallant judgment in June for $38,000 out of my mother's estate, which came through in the second week of that month. I made him sign a promissory note, 0 interest, $250 a month, and it is a real document that Marguerite Okwuosa drew up, and he signed it at the kitchen table, and he did not argue about it for 1 second, which is how I knew he needed it as much as I did. We are still married. I know how that lands. I have had it landed on me by 3 separate people, including my cousin, who took the spare room offer off the table when I told her. I went back to work in September at a different carrier 4 days a week, not because he asked, because I wanted a number in an account with my name on it that was not my mother's money. Bernadette found out. Not from me, from Wade, who got it from Dee, who got it from Kurt, who finally told his brother in July in a truck outside a hardware store, which is where the men in that family transact everything. She has not apologized. She rang me in August and talked for 40 minutes about a hip replacement, and then said at the very end, "I always did wonder how you managed that house on the one salary," and hung up before I could answer, which I have decided to take as an apology because I am not going to get another one. Kurt got the mail last Tuesday. He came in with it and put it on the hall table, face up, the whole stack, and did not sort it. He said, "There's one from Corner cornerstone. It's the escrow thing. I said, yeah, that's annual. And he said, right. And then on his way to the kitchen, without turning round, it's addressed to you.